Hello there. The UK government has responded to the shortage of hard-worked HGV drivers by dangerously extending their hours on the road. As per usual, please like, subscribe and comment below. And why not buy a mug with my mug on it? Now this sounds a little bit risky to me. Instead of addressing the real driving forces behind the HGV driver shortage crisis, the Secretary of State for Transport Grant Shapps has stuck a plaster on a tumour by temporarily increasing the amount of hours an HGV driver can legally drive, like the completely clueless f***tard that he is. The UK Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has tweeted this afternoon, "We're aware of a shortage of HGV drivers, so I'm announcing a temporary extension of drivers' hours rules from Monday the 12th of July, giving flexibility to drivers and operators to make slightly longer journeys. We've ramped up the number of driving tests available and will consider other measures." Now, I had heard that there was a shortage of HGV drivers and that it was beginning to impact on supplies of food to supermarkets, and the first thing that happens is the usual suspects surface and simplistically blame Brexit. Surprise, surprise. And listening to them, you'd think that driving HGVs was the sole preserve of those from the EU 27, that the UK doesn't do such things as drive big smelly lorries. But we do need to take this seriously, as people do need their food. But isn't it strange that I can still order something from Amazon and still get it from a stocked warehouse the next day, even on Saturday? Anyway, Brexit could very well be a contributory factor, as could the pandemic restrictions. After all, if you lived across the Channel in the EU, would you be interested in working in the UK? Another point to note here is that the numbers of EU citizens applying to stay in the UK post-Brexit was, at the last count, around 5.5 million people, some 1.5 to 2 million more than we thought were actually living here. Please don't tell me that every EU citizen but HGV drivers stayed here. And if all the EU HGV drivers did leave, it shows you how low pay and conditions must have become for drivers in the UK over the last few years, maybe decades. And some of those EU drivers were paid less than the minimum wage here, via the agency posting racket. So the truth is a bit more mundane and a bit more biting. It's all about the pay and conditions. And the first point to note is that there are 70,000 or so HGV drivers that could get back out on the road in the UK, but don't want to because they feel they're being taken for a ride. And it's not like anyone is going to take you on and train you. No, you're expected to fork out the £3,000 and qualify first. And further, truckers face mounting regulations, medical requirements, face irate motorists, and their job carries a negative prestige. Then there's the overnight stays miles from home with no facilities, something that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. And that cannot possibly be right. And even though they don't load the trucks, they're the ones that are liable for the huge fines meted out if they get pulled over and the authorities find something wrong. People don't invest themselves and their own money in an industry like this, then leave when there are so many vacancies, unless there is a good reason. And another point is insurance. It's cheaper to use older drivers. Hence, the average HGV driver age in the UK is 53. Many of these are soon to retire with no youngsters coming through to replace them. those men and women risk their very lives in squalid conditions, working unsociable hours and for peanuts, whilst large supermarket chains pay agencies small fortunes for drivers, yet only a fraction of that money gets to the drivers themselves. No wonder HGV drivers are leaving the job and opting for easier career routes. And it seems that the UK is now about 60,000 drivers short, and that could balloon to over 250,000 within 18 months, according to some reports. This does not sound like a Brexit and or pandemic problem to me. It sounds like an inevitable problem that was bearing down on us whatever we did. Unless, of course, we'd started treating HGV drivers with a bit more respect, pay and better working conditions. So life is hard on the road for an HGV driver without the low pay, but now Grant Shapps is relaxing the rules to allow drivers to spend longer on the roads or be driven to by their paymasters. And that will presumably mean the safety rules have been relaxed for already hard-pressed drivers. Rules that govern what is arguably the third most dangerous job in the UK, and dangerous for car drivers and cyclists on the same road as them. Drivers should be driving for fewer hours, not more, and at a vastly increased wage, a wage that reflects the financial and physical risks they take. Now I can hear some gearing up to scream about market forces, supply and demand. But from the sound of it, that is not working here. Yet. And unless something is done very quickly, there will be nothing left on the shelves, and you can scream market forces and supply and demand into that empty space on the supermarket shelf, where that loaf of bread should be. But hopefully before that point comes, drivers will find that demand for their services is driving their pay up, and getting qualified drivers back in their seats in all of those cabs. Moving on. Now yesterday I talked about how the left would be triggered by the new elections bill that, once it becomes law, will require all voters to prove their identity prior to casting their ballot at the polling station. And the lefty SNP, in the form of the horizontally endowed Westminster leader Ian Blackford, has risen to the bait. But on rising to his feet in the House of Commons to ask his first of two questions during Prime Minister's Questions today, Mr. Blackford stunned everyone into silence. Because the first words out of his mouth were to wish good luck to the English football team in their game with Denmark starting at 8 o'clock tonight. After recovering myself into my chair and dusting myself down, wondering if too much single malt had passed his lips, I then heard Blackford rail against these new voter ID proposals. And he trotted out all the same tired old lefty arguments about disenfranchising the disadvantaged, of which there appear to be a substantial number in Scotland given the way he was pontificating, and also that none of them have a photo ID. At least here the PM had the good grace to gently point out to the SNP Westminster leader that free photo ID will be available from local councils. Blackford also said that Boris was a tin pot dictator and that there were so few examples of voter fraud, it was obviously that the Tory party had courted to its right wing and forced a solution where no problem existed. To which Boris answered that surely it must be right to ensure that all voters are assured that each of their votes matters and is valued. And I would say that it's better to get a grip early when a growing problem has been identified, rather than let it snowball out of all control like certain problems now manifesting themselves in Scotland. Now, do you remember one Gina Miller? She who took the UK government to court to force the then PM Theresa May to get an Act of Parliament before she could trigger Article 50. Well, talking to LBC's Rachel Johnson, yes, that's Boris's sister, Ms Miller said that the reason she went through all that was purely to make sure that the UK followed the law so that the EU wouldn't be able to sue the UK over it later. It was nothing to do about Brexit, she said, because Brexit did not appear on the court documents. It was all about parliamentary sovereignty. I was terrified by that, she said, because I thought, hang on, we're going to be going into a negotiation which we must go and do legally, but we could be treading water for years while they take us to the international court to say we've broken the international treaty. And here was me thinking that she did it to give MPs and Lords the opportunity to vote against triggering Article 50, so stopping Brexit in its tracks. But no, it was all about stopping Brussels having the chance to sue us and slow a speedy Brexit down. Yeah, if you say so, Jaina, if you say so. So a big thanks to my Patreon and PayPal supporters, and what's your opinion on extending HGV drivers' hours? Please like and comment below.